They said I deserted from the Navy. At my brother's graduation, the general recognized me as colonel. My family swore I was a Navy deserter. I remained silent during my brother's decoration ceremony as a Special Forces commando. Then his general looked at me directly and said, "Colonel, are you here?" The crowd froze. My father's jaw hit the floor. The air became thick as General Martinez's words echoed throughout the auditorium. I could feel hundreds of stares piercing me like daggers, especially those of my father and mother in the front row. Their faces paled as if they had seen a ghost. Not just any ghost, but the ghost of betrayal they themselves had created. I'm Daniel, 34 years old, and for the past 8 years my family has told everyone that I abandoned the Navy out of cowardice. My father, Robert, a former lieutenant who never achieved the military glory he longed for, had turned my supposed desertion into his favorite topic during family gatherings. "Daniel couldn't stand even 3 months of basic training," he would repeat while serving whiskey to his friends. "Thank God we have Charles. He has what it takes." My mother, Sarah, would nod with a mixture of shame and disappointment, as if I had forever stained the family name. The reality was completely different. I was recruited for a special operations unit so classified that I couldn't even reveal its existence to my own family. I signed confidentiality protocols that prohibited me from talking about my rank, missions, or location. While my family believed I was working at a small security company in the capital, I had led operations in more than 15 countries, rising to the rank of colonel in record time. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering was an exercise in restraint. "At least you found something you can handle," my father would say, patting my shoulder condescendingly while praising Charles's basic training achievements. "Your brother will soon be a Special Forces Navy commando. Do you know what that means?" Of course I knew. I had trained several of them. Justice seemed unattainable while I maintained my oath of silence, but fate has unexpected ways of manifesting itself. When Charles invited me to his graduation ceremony, I agreed to attend despite knowing how uncomfortable it would be. My younger brother wasn't to blame for our parents' lies. He really believed I had quit, since that's what they had told him since he was 16. "I know this might be difficult for you," he wrote to me, "but it would mean a lot if you were there." I chose a seat in the back row, away from my family, wearing civilian clothes instead of the uniform I was entitled to by right. What no one in my family knew was that General Martinez, who would preside over the ceremony, had been my direct superior for 3 years in operations that remained classified. I watched him approach the podium with his characteristic stern bearing, how he adjusted the microphone and began to speak about honor, loyalty, and sacrifice, values that had forced me to endure years of family humiliation in silence. I saw Charles receive his insignia with pride, my parents applauding with tears in their eyes from the front row. I also applauded discreetly, genuinely happy for my brother. It was then that it happened. General Martinez paused, surveyed the auditorium with his gaze, and his eyes stopped on me. I saw immediate recognition on his face, followed by something that seemed like indignation. "Before concluding," he said into the microphone, his voice resonating with authority, "I must recognize someone whose presence here today is as unexpected as it is honorable." A murmur ran through the room. "Colonel Daniel, could you stand up?" I felt time stop. Murmurs swept through the auditorium like a wave as I slowly stood up. I saw my father searching for me with his gaze, confused until his eyes met mine. His expression went from confusion to total bewilderment. My mother brought a hand to her mouth, stifling a scream. Charles, still standing next to General Martinez, looked completely lost. "Colonel Daniel," the general continued, "is one of the most decorated officers I have had the honor of knowing. His work in special operations has saved countless lives and has been fundamental to national security. It is a privilege to have him here, especially considering he has just returned from a 6-month mission." The silence was absolute. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears as I remained standing, rigid, with my hands at my sides. The revenge I had never actively sought was serving itself, cold and decisive. "I must admit my surprise," the general added, "to discover that he is the brother of Lieutenant Charles. Military excellence clearly runs in the family." I felt dozens of gazes alternating between my brother and me. Charles seemed to be processing the information, his face a mixture of amazement and confusion. When the general concluded his speech, he indicated for me to approach the stage. Every step I took down the central aisle seemed like an eternity. I passed by my family without looking at them, although I could feel the intensity of their eyes following me. Upon reaching the stage, the general shook my hand firmly in front of everyone. "It's good to see you without uniform for once, Daniel," he told me quietly, while cameras captured the moment. "Although it seems your family didn't expect to see you at all." "It's complicated, sir," I replied, maintaining a diplomatic smile. Charles approached, his face a mixture of contradictory emotions. "Colonel?" he asked quietly, as if the word were foreign in his mouth. "What is the general talking about?" I didn't have time to respond. As soon as the ceremony officially concluded, we were surrounded by officers, cadets, and family members. Several commanders approached to greet me, treating me with a respect that contrasted brutally with the disdain I was accustomed to at family gatherings. I saw in the distance how my father made his way through the crowd, his face now red with anger or shame, probably both. "We need to talk," he demanded when he finally managed to approach. My mother and my younger sister Laura followed closely behind. "What does all this mean?" "Not here," I replied calmly. "We won't ruin Charles's day." My brother remained by my side, clearly divided between confusion and family loyalty. A superior officer approached to congratulate him, momentarily breaking the tension. "At the restaurant, then," my father insisted. "The reservation is for 2 o'clock. I nodded briefly before being approached by another group of officers. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Elena, my wife. "Everything okay?" You looked tense from where I was sitting. Elena was the only person who knew the whole truth. I had met her during a mission in Colombia 5 years ago, and, as an intelligence analyst, she had the necessary clearance to know the details of my work. "The truth finally came to light," I replied. "See you at the restaurant." The journey to the restaurant was one of the most uncomfortable moments of my life. I chose to go in my own vehicle. I needed those minutes of solitude to prepare myself. The family betrayal I had endured for years was about to face the truth, and I didn't know exactly how to handle the situation. Upon arriving at the elegant restaurant near the naval base, I saw they had reserved a private room. My family was already there, including my uncles James and Michelle, who had heard for years the stories about my supposed cowardice. Elena arrived almost at the same time as me. Her presence gave me the strength I needed. "Are you going to explain to us what's happening?" my father demanded as soon as I closed the door to the private room. His voice trembled, not with sadness, but with contained rage. "I think General Martinez already explained it quite well," I replied calmly. "I'm a colonel in Special Forces. I've served for the past 10 years in classified operations. Why did you never say anything?" Charles asked, his voice mixing confusion with something that sounded dangerously like admiration. "I couldn't. I signed extreme confidentiality protocols. My unit officially doesn't exist." "That's ridiculous," my father interrupted. "We would have kept the secret. We're your family." The bitter laugh that escaped my lips surprised even Elena. "Keep the secret? The same family that spent 8 years telling everyone I was a deserter and a coward?" The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible. My mother lowered her gaze to her empty plate. My uncle James, always the diplomat, tried to intervene. "Daniel, you must understand that your father only repeated what you yourself told them when you left basic training." "I never said such a thing," I replied, feeling how the anger contained for years threatened to overflow. "When I was recruited for special operations, I simply said I had been reassigned and couldn't talk about it. You were the ones who built the story of my desertion." My father hit the table with his fist. "That's not what happened. You disappeared for weeks and then appeared saying you had left the Navy. How did you expect us to interpret that?" I breathed deeply, remembering those first days. The recruitment had been so sudden, so secret, that I barely had time to plan how to handle the situation with my family. "I told you exactly what I was allowed to say," I replied with a controlled voice. "That I had been transferred to a special unit and couldn't discuss the details. Never, not once, did I say I had abandoned the Navy." "Lies," my father exclaimed, although I could see doubt emerging in his eyes. Elena intervened with her characteristic professional calm. "I understand that recruitment for that specific unit is extremely abrupt, isn't it, Daniel? Without time for proper goodbyes or detailed explanations." Charles observed the exchange intently. "Why didn't you ever tell me anything, at least me? When I decided to join the Navy, you could have given me some clue." "I couldn't risk the security of operations, not even for you," I replied, feeling the weight of years of silence. "Besides, would you have believed me? Everyone in this family was convinced I was a military failure. And Elena could know? My mother asked, speaking for the first time. Elena works in naval intelligence, I explained. She has clearance to know certain aspects of my work. The waiter entered to take orders, providing a necessary pause in the tension. No one seemed to have an appetite, but we ordered out of courtesy. When we were alone again, my father seemed to have regained part of his composure. Suppose it's true, he said with a more measured tone. Why did you allow us to believe the worst for years? Why endure being treated like a failure? I completed his sentence. At first, it was out of obligation. Then, when I saw how quickly you were willing to believe the worst of me, it became a test. A test? Laura asked, my younger sister who had always been the most understanding in the family. Of trust, I replied. Of family faith. A test that everyone failed spectacularly. The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of my phone. It was an encrypted message that required my immediate attention. I excused myself to respond, momentarily stepping away from the table. When I returned, the conversation had taken an unexpected turn. General Martinez told me some things while you were away, Charles said, his voice full of new respect. He said you were decorated 3 times for valor in combat, although he can't go into details about the missions. My father seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. Is it true? He asked with a barely audible voice. I cannot confirm or deny classified information, I replied automatically, an answer I had given hundreds of times in official briefings. For God's sake, Daniel, we're not in an interrogation, said my Uncle James. We're trying to understand how we've lived wrong all these years. The food arrived, creating another brief respite. No one ate much. The tension had stolen our appetite. Finally, my mother broke the silence. Do you hate us? She asked directly, her eyes searching mine. The question took me by surprise. I had expected defensiveness, maybe even some attempt to rewrite history, but not this direct vulnerability. I don't hate you, I replied honestly, but your lack of trust in me has been painful. I always knew there was something more, Laura said suddenly. It never made sense that you would quit, not after how you talked about serving your country throughout high school. Thank you for that, I replied. You didn't say anything to defend me. I tried at first, she admitted, lowering her gaze, but no one listened to me. The lunch continued with an uncomfortable mixture of questions. Some I could answer and many I couldn't. The family dynamic I had known for years was transforming before my eyes, and I wasn't sure how to handle this new territory. After dessert, which we barely touched, my father asked to speak with me privately. We went out to the restaurant's garden. For the first time, I noticed how aged he was. His shoulders, which had always seemed so imposing in my childhood, now looked drooped under the weight of revelation. I've made a terrible mistake, he finally said, looking toward the horizon instead of at me. I judged you without having all the facts. You had the facts I could give you, I replied. You chose not to believe them. It was easier to believe you had failed than to accept there was something you couldn't tell me, he admitted with difficulty. My pride, my damn military pride, prevented me from seeing the obvious. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to accept his apology, close this painful chapter and move forward. Another part, the one that had endured years of dismissive comments and disappointed looks, needed more. Do you know what hurt me most? I finally asked. It wasn't the lies you told others. It was how you rushed to believe the worst of your own son. My father nodded slowly, accepting the blow. I don't expect you to forgive me easily. I just want the chance to try to repair the damage. As we returned inside, I saw Elena chatting animatedly with Charles. My brother seemed to be absorbing every word she said, probably telling him about the parts of my career that could be shared. My mother watched us with an expression difficult to decipher. Your wife is extraordinary, she told me when I sat next to her. She's been telling us about your humanitarian aid work after natural disasters. Elena knew exactly which parts of my career could be discussed openly. The humanitarian aid operations we had carried out in Mexico and Colombia after earthquakes were public knowledge, although my specific participation wasn't. It's the part of my job that gives me the most satisfaction, I replied honestly. I wonder how many other things we don't know about you, my mother said with a hint of sadness. Many, I admitted. Some you'll never know for national security reasons, others because too many years passed without asking. The afternoon progressed, and the initial tension began to transform into something different. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but at least it was recognition. Recognition of mistakes, Hidden truths, lost years. Charles sat next to me, his dress uniform contrasting with my civilian clothes. You were always my hero when we were kids, he confessed quietly. When everyone said you had quit, something inside me broke. Now I understand why it hurt so much. I never wanted to disappoint you, I told him. Of everyone in the family, you were the one I cared most about protecting. Protecting. You were the one who needed protection. From us, from our judgments. The celebration that should have been in honor of Charles had become something completely different. My brother, far from feeling overshadowed, seemed relieved to discover the truth. At the end of the afternoon, as we prepared to leave, General Martinez unexpectedly appeared at the restaurant. He approached our table with that air of authority that characterized him. Family, he greeted formally. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I need to inform the colonel that a situation has arisen that requires his attention. My family watched with amazement as General Martinez, a legendary figure in the Navy, treated me with professional deference. This man, before whom my father would always have stood at attention with absolute respect, was consulting me. Is it urgent, sir? I asked, knowing he wouldn't have come personally if it weren't. I'm afraid so, Colonel. Your team is being mobilized. Elena immediately understood what that meant. We looked at each other briefly, a complete conversation passing between us without words. She knew I could go weeks or even months without seeing her. Are you leaving? Laura asked, grasping the gravity of the moment. It's my job, I replied simply. My father, who had spent the afternoon processing his mistake, seemed to finally understand the magnitude of my commitment to service. I saw in his eyes something I had never seen directed toward me. Respect. When will we see you again? My mother asked, her voice betraying her concern. That depends on the mission, I replied, knowing it was an unsatisfactory but honest answer. I said goodbye to each one, promising to communicate when I could. Charles's hug was especially significant. Take care, brother, he told me. We have a lot to talk about when you return. As I left with General Martinez, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. The revenge I had never actively sought had come in the form of revealed truth. The justice I had waited for years was finally beginning to manifest. But more importantly, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The weight of being considered a failure by those who should have believed in me most. 3 months passed before I could communicate with my family again. The mission had been intense, taking me to conflict zones where every day was a test of survival. During that time, Elena kept my family informed about my general well-being without being able to share specific details. When I finally returned, exhausted but unharmed, I found a very different family reality from the one I had left. My father had exhaustively researched my career within the limits of what was public information. He had contacted old Navy colleagues, searching for pieces of the puzzle that was his eldest son's life. Your father has been obsessed, Elena told me when she picked me up at the base. He's been reconstructing your career like it was a forensic case. I think he's trying to compensate for years of misunderstanding. And the others? I asked, curious to know how the situation had evolved. Charles admires you more than ever. Your mother oscillates between pride and guilt. Laura has been the most understanding. She says she always knew there was something more to your story. We drove to our house in silence. Part of me wanted to maintain distance, protect myself from new disappointments. Another part longed for reconciliation, a chance to have the family I had always wanted. The next day, I received a call from my father. His voice sounded different, more humble than I had ever heard it. Can we meet? He asked simply. We agreed to meet at a park near my house. When I arrived, I found him sitting on a bench holding a folder. He seemed to have aged years in just a few months. Thank you for coming, he said, standing to greet me. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a few moments before he finally spoke. I've spent these months trying to understand, he began, trying to reconstruct the truth I ignored for so long. He opened the folder, and I saw newspaper clippings, declassified official documents, photographs. He had gathered everything he could find about military operations in which I had potentially participated. Most are suppositions, he continued. The dates coincide with your absences, the places with the few clues you left over the years. He pointed to a blurry photograph from an international newspaper. A group of unidentified soldiers evacuating civilians during a crisis in South America. This is you, isn't it? The image was too distorted to identify me with certainty, but I remembered that mission perfectly. It had been one of the few rescue operations that became public, although without naming the participants. I can't confirm that, I replied automatically. My father nodded, understanding. I know. I just wanted to show you that I've been trying to understand, to see what I refused to see for years. He closed the folder and set it aside. I've been a terrible father, Daniel. I let my pride and my own insecurities cloud my judgment. I turned your silence into failure, because it was easier to believe you had failed than to accept you were doing something I could never accomplish. It was the most sincere apology I had ever heard from him. The proud man I had always known seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone capable of recognizing his mistakes. What do you want from me? I asked directly. A second chance, he replied without hesitation. Not to erase the past. That's impossible. But to build something new based on truth, or at least all the truth you can share. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. It was Elena. You need to come home now, she said, her voice tense. There's someone here who needs to see you urgently. Who? I asked, alarmed by her tone. Commander Rodriguez. He says it's about Medellin. My blood froze. Medellin had been one of my first missions, one that had gone terribly wrong. 3 of my men had died. I had been seriously wounded, spending weeks in a secret military hospital. It was during that period when my family began to solidify the narrative of my desertion. I'm on my way, I replied, hanging up quickly. I looked at my father. I have to go. Is it work? He asked, perceiving the urgency. Yes, something has come up. I hesitated a moment before adding, if you want, you can come with me. You won't be able to be present during the meeting, but at least you'll know where I am this time. The surprise on his face was evident. It was the first time I had offered any kind of inclusion in my professional life. I'd like that, he said simply. We drove in silence to my house. When we arrived, I found Commander Rodriguez sitting in my living room, with Elena serving him coffee. Rodriguez was surprised to see my father, but made no comments. Colonel, I'm sorry to interrupt your family time, but this couldn't wait, he said, standing up. My father will wait in the kitchen, I explained. Can Elena stay? Rodriguez nodded. Considering her clearance level, yes. Once my father had withdrawn, Rodriguez got straight to the point. They've found Thompson, he said, mentioning the name of the drug trafficker responsible for the ambush in Medellin that had cost my men their lives. He's alive and operating under a new identity in Argentina. The news hit me like a physical blow. For years, we had believed Thompson had died in a subsequent confrontation. Confirmed? I asked, my voice professionally controlled despite the inner storm. DNA and facial recognition, 99% match, Rodriguez confirmed. General Martinez is forming a team for extraction. He wants you to lead it. The justice I had waited for years for my fallen men was finally within reach. But it also meant another mission, another separation from the family I was just beginning to reconnect with. When? I asked. Full briefing tomorrow at 600. Estimated departure in 72 hours. After Rodriguez left, I sat in silence, processing the information. Elena perfectly understood what this meant for me. You have to go, she said softly. For Martinez, Johnson, and Garcia. The names of my fallen men that she knew I carried with me every day. I know, I replied. But right now, when there's finally a chance to fix things with my family, your family will understand, she said with conviction. Or at least they should, after everything that's happened. When I returned to the kitchen, I found my father looking out the window, lost in his thoughts. I have to leave again, I told him without preamble. In 3 days. I expected to see disappointment or frustration on his face, the reactions I was used to when duty called. Instead, I saw understanding. Is it dangerous? He asked. I can't go into details. I know, he nodded. Just come back, okay? Your mother is organizing a family dinner when you return. She says she has a lot to make up for. The simplicity of his acceptance took me by surprise. For years, my absences had been treated with disdain or indifference. Now, without even knowing the details, my father was offering support. I'll do my best to come back in one piece, I promised. That's all we ask, he replied. And for the first time in decades, I felt that we really included my entire family. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations and briefings. The operation would be complex. Locate and extract one of the most notorious drug traffickers who now lived under a false identity in Buenos Aires. Intelligence suggested Thompson still maintained connections with active cartels, financing operations from his comfortable exile. The night before departure, my family insisted on gathering for dinner. It was a somber gathering, everyone aware I was heading into danger, though without knowing the specific details. "We've spent too many years criticizing you for things we didn't understand," my mother said during dinner. "This time we want you to know we're proud, regardless of what you can't tell us." Charles, who understood better than the others the inherent risks of special operations, gave me a particularly tight hug when we said goodbye. "Take care, brother," he said with a tense voice. "And if you need backup, you know where to find me." Laura gave me a small medal of St. Michael, patron of soldiers. "I know you probably have a dozen of these," she said with a sad smile. "But one more can't hurt." My father was the last to say goodbye. He walked me to the car where Elena waited to take me to the base. "There's so much I'd like to tell you," he began, the words coming with difficulty. "So many years lost due to my stupidity." "We'll have time to talk when I return," I assured him. "I hope so," he replied. Then, to my surprise, he stood at attention and offered me a formal military salute. "It's an honor to be your father, Colonel." I returned the salute, more moved than I wanted to admit. "Thank you, Lieutenant." As Elena drove toward the base, I reflected on the strange turn my life had taken. The family betrayal I had endured for years was slowly transforming into something new, something I never expected to have. "They're trying," Elena commented, reading my thoughts as always. "Yes," I admitted, "but now I have to focus on the mission. I can't let this distract me." "It won't," she affirmed with confidence. "If anything, it gives you more reasons to come back." The operation in Argentina was one of the most challenging of my career. Thompson had built a new life with powerful connections in Buenos Aires. His extraction required weeks of surveillance, meticulous planning, and finally, a nighttime raid on his heavily protected villa. When we finally had him, face to face after so many years, I saw recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly who I was and why I had come. "Daniel," he said, pronouncing my name like a curse. "I thought you had died in Medellin." "That's what you wanted everyone to believe," I replied, keeping him immobilized while my team secured the perimeter. "But now everyone will know the truth. About Medellin, about the 3 soldiers you murdered, about everything." Thompson's extraction was supposed to be quick and discreet, but nothing went according to plan. We were ambushed during extraction, probably by forces loyal to him who had been alerted. The firefight that followed was brutal and intense. I lost 2 men and was shot in the shoulder myself before we could evacuate with Thompson. The return trip was a blur of pain and determination. I refused medical attention until Thompson was secure in custody. Only then did I allow the medics to treat my wound. "Stubborn as always, Colonel," the medic commented as he cleaned the wound. "A few inches to the right and we'd be having a very different conversation." The bullet had passed cleanly through my shoulder, causing damage but not hitting anything vital. It would require surgery and rehabilitation, but I would survive. While they prepared me for surgery, I asked them to notify Elena and, by extension, my family. I woke up hours after surgery to find Elena sitting beside my bed. Her face showed relief at seeing me conscious, mixed with concern for my condition. "Hello, soldier," she said softly, taking my hand. "You gave us quite a scare." "Thompson?" was the first thing I asked, my voice hoarse from intubation during surgery. "In custody and singing like a bird from what I've been told," she replied. "Your mission was a success, though at a high cost." I closed my eyes briefly, allowing myself to feel the pain for the 2 men we had lost. "Parker and Williams. Good soldiers, good men. Your family is outside," Elena continued, surprising me. "All of them?" I asked, genuinely astonished. "They came as soon as I notified them. Your father practically stormed the military hospital reception demanding information. I think they almost arrested him until General Martinez intervened." The image of my father, always so respectful of military hierarchy, causing a scene for me was hard to imagine. For years, his reactions to my absences had oscillated between indifference and disdain. "Do you want to see them?" Elena asked. I nodded slowly. I felt vulnerable, not just from the physical wound, but from this new emotional territory we were exploring as a family. They entered one by one. My mother was first, her face marked by recent tears. She approached cautiously, as if afraid of hurting me more. "Daniel," she whispered, taking my free hand gently. "My boy." I hadn't been her boy in decades, but in that moment, weakened by surgery and painkillers, the simple show of maternal affection moved me more than I could have imagined. Laura entered next, her eyes clinically evaluating my condition, always the practical one in the family. "You look terrible," she commented, but her smile betrayed her relief. "Though I've seen corpses with better color than you usually have, so it's not a big change." Her attempt at family humor relieved some of the tension. Charles remained at the foot of the bed, his expression a mixture of professional concern and fraternal admiration. "General Martinez told us about the mission. He said what he could tell at least. He said you demonstrated exceptional valor under enemy fire." "I was just doing my job," I replied automatically. "No," my father intervened, finally entering the room. "You did much more than that. You completed the mission and brought your team back despite being wounded." He stopped beside my bed, his rigid posture contrasting with the emotion in his eyes. "That's not just doing a job, that's exemplary leadership." Coming from him, a decorated veteran and relentless critic, those words meant more than I could express. For the first time in my adult life, I saw genuine pride in my father's eyes. Not the performative pride he had shown at Charles's ceremonies, but sincere recognition of my merits. "The doctors say you'll need rehabilitation," my mother continued, always practical. "We've discussed it, and we think you should recover at home. Our home." "I have my own house, Mom," I replied, exchanging a glance with Elena. "I know, but—" She hesitated. "We'd like to take care of you. Make up for some of the lost time." The offer left me momentarily speechless. For years I had handled my own wounds, physical and emotional, without the family support others took for granted. "We could take turns," Laura suggested. "I can adjust my hospital schedule to help with rehabilitation exercises. And I can request temporary leave," Charles added. "I have accumulated weeks of leave." My father didn't offer words, but his expression said what he couldn't verbalize. He wanted to be part of this, part of my recovery, part of my life. "Thank you," I finally said. "I'll think about it." That night, after everyone had left except Elena, I reflected on the strange turn my life had taken. The revenge I never actively sought had come in the form of revealed truth. Justice for my fallen men in Medellin had finally materialized with Thompson's capture. And now, the most unexpected thing, a possible family reconciliation. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked, noticing my silence. "How ironic all this is," I replied. "I spent years enduring their lies and judgments, and now they're desperate to make up for it." "Guilt is a powerful motivator," she commented. "Do you think it's sincere?" I considered the question carefully. "I think so, or at least I want to believe it." "Will you accept their offer? Recover at their house?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to give them that chance. Another part fears it's too much, too soon." Elena nodded, understanding my dilemma. "Whatever your decision, I'll support you." The following days were a whirlwind of medical visits, official statements about the operation, and decisions about my recovery. Finally, I opted for a compromise. I would spend the first 2 weeks of rehabilitation at my parents' house, with Elena staying with me, and then we would evaluate the situation. The day they discharged me, my father came to pick me up personally. The trip to the family home was full of cautious conversations, both of us navigating this new territory of mutual respect. "I've been thinking a lot," he said while driving, "about why it was so easy for me to believe the worst of you all these years." I didn't respond, giving him space to continue. "I think in part it was simpler to see you as a failure than to face the possibility that you were doing something more dangerous than I ever did," he confessed. "The idea that my son could be risking his life in operations he couldn't even mention. It was easier to believe you had quit." "Fear," I said simply. "Yes," he admitted, surprising me with his frankness. "Fear that you would suffer a fate worse than desertion. Fear of not being able to protect you." That night, during dinner, I observed my family with new eyes. My mother was visibly trying to make me feel comfortable, serving my childhood favorite dishes. Laura and Charles kept the conversation light, avoiding topics that might tense the atmosphere. My father, normally dominant in these gatherings, remained unusually quiet, watching me with a mixture of pride and remorse. After dinner, while everyone was retiring, my father asked me to accompany him to his study. Once inside, he closed the door and went to an old cabinet that had always remained locked. He opened it with a key he took from his pocket, revealing a collection of military medals and recognitions. "I never showed you this," he said, taking out a worn wooden box. "Maybe because I never thought you'd be interested." He opened the box, revealing a medal I recognized immediately. the Cross for Valor, one of the highest decorations for heroism in combat. I received it during an operation in Central America, in the 80s, he explained. I never talked about it because many aspects remain classified, even now. The revelation left me stunned. Throughout my life, I had heard my father's stories about his service, but they had always been sanitized versions, suitable for dinner table conversations. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. Because I want you to understand that, in a way, I understand you better than you think, he replied. I also lived with secrets. The difference is that I had the luxury of leaving that world behind when I had you and your siblings. You've been living in both worlds simultaneously. He took the medal and, to my surprise, handed it to me. I want you to have it, as a symbol that, although belatedly, I recognize your sacrifice and your service. The gesture left me speechless. It was more than a simple transfer of a valuable object. It was recognition, from soldier to soldier, of the shared burdens we had never been able to discuss. Thank you, I finally said, feeling the weight of the medal in my hand. It means a lot. The weeks of recovery at my parents' house were a time of healing, not just physical but emotional. Each day brought small revelations, moments of connection that had been absent for decades. My mother showed me photo albums she had kept updated despite my absence, including newspaper clippings that mentioned operations I might have participated in. Laura shared stories of how she had defended my honor in family gatherings when I wasn't present. Charles and I forged a new relationship based on mutual respect as military professionals, not the competition our parents had fostered. 1 year after Thompson's capture, I found myself once again in a military auditorium. This time it was I who was going to be decorated. The mission in Argentina, despite its complications, had been a resounding success that dismantled one of the most dangerous drug trafficking networks in Latin America. My family occupied the front row. My father, wearing his full dress uniform with all his medals, maintained a proud posture. My mother, elegant and emotional, held a handkerchief she occasionally brought to her eyes. Charles, also in uniform, and Laura, radiant in a formal suit, completed the family picture. Elena, as always, was my rock, sitting with the dignity and poise that characterized her. General Martinez gave a speech detailing the contributions that could be made public, naturally omitting the classified aspects of the operation. When he mentioned the 2 men we had lost, Parker and Williams, we observed a moment of respectful silence. Colonel Daniel, the general continued, exemplifies the best of our armed forces, his dedication to duty, his bravery under enemy fire, and his unwavering commitment to the mission, and his men deserve our highest recognition. They called me to the stage. As I climbed the steps, I remembered another ceremony a year ago, when I had remained silent in the back row. The difference between both moments was abysmal. General Martinez handed me the medal, one of the highest decorations for valor in combat. We shook hands, and then I approached the microphone for the brief words expected of me. This honor, I began, truly belongs to the men and women with whom I have had the privilege of serving, especially those who made the supreme sacrifice. I mentioned the names of all the fallen under my command over the years, including the 3 from Medellin and the 2 recent ones in Argentina. Their valor and sacrifice are the true essence of service. I paused, searching for my family's faces in the front row. I also want to thank my family, who have endured my absences, my silences, and yes, even my secrets. Military service is not only performed by those who wear the uniform, but also by those who wait at home, keeping the light on. I saw tears in my mother's eyes, a solemn nod from my father. Charles maintained a perfectly military posture, but emotion was evident on his face. Laura smiled openly, proud. The reception afterward was a moment of contained celebration, as military events usually are. Colleagues and superiors approached to congratulate me, some to discreetly discuss aspects of the operation that couldn't be mentioned publicly. My father remained by my side during much of the evening, a silent but supportive presence. At one point, while we were briefly alone, he turned to me. "I'm trying to remember if I ever told you how proud I am to be your father," he said, his voice unusually vulnerable. "Not in those words," I replied honestly. "Then let me say it now without ambiguities. I am immensely proud of you, Daniel. Not just for this," he pointed to the medal, "but for the man you've become despite my mistakes." The words I had longed to hear for decades had finally arrived. They didn't erase the past, but they offered a bridge to a different future. That night, after the ceremony concluded, Elena and I invited the entire family to our house for a more intimate celebration. While I served drinks in our small garden, I observed the scene with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. My father conversing animatedly with Elena about international politics. My mother showing photos of my niece to Charles and his pregnant wife. Laura discussing the latest medical advances with a colleague we had invited. It was an image of family normalcy I never thought I would experience. The betrayal that had defined our relationship for years had been replaced by a new understanding. Imperfect but genuine. "A penny for your thoughts," Elena said, approaching with 2 glasses of wine. "I was thinking about how things change," I replied, accepting a glass. "A year ago, my family believed I was a cowardly deserter. Now they're celebrating my decoration for valor in combat. Truth has transformative power," she commented. "Even when it arrives late." "Yes," I agreed. "Even when it arrives late." My father approached, holding his own glass. "Am I interrupting?" he asked with a consideration that would have been unthinkable in the past. "Not at all," Elena replied, excusing herself to give me a moment alone with him. We remained silent for a moment, observing the starry sky. "There's something I wanted to ask you," he finally said. "Something I've been thinking about since I learned the truth about your career." "Go ahead," I encouraged him. "During all those years when we said those horrible things about you, when we treated you like a failure, didn't you ever feel the temptation to reveal the truth to us? To throw all your achievements in our faces?" The question took me by surprise, although it was something I had asked myself many times. "Of course I did," I admitted. "There were moments when I wanted to scream the truth at you, especially during family gatherings when you and Mom never missed an opportunity to compare Charles and me." "Why didn't you do it?" he insisted. "Because my oath meant more than my pride," I replied simply. "And because over time it became a personal test, a way of measuring my own strength." My father nodded slowly, processing my words. "A test you passed with honors, while we failed miserably." "I don't see it that way," I replied after a moment. "We were all operating with incomplete information. I knew the truth, but couldn't share it. You had partial truth and drew conclusions based on it." "You're very generous," he said, his voice loaded with contained emotion. "More than we deserve." "It's not about deserving," I replied. "It's about choosing, and I choose to leave resentment behind." My father extended his hand, offering me a toast. "To second chances," he proposed. I clinked my glass with his. To second chances. As the night progressed, surrounded by the family that had finally learned to see me as I really was, I reflected on the strange path that had brought me there. The justice I had longed for had arrived, not as devastating revenge, but as healing revelation. My family had sworn I was a Navy deserter. I had remained silent for years, enduring their disdain. But when the truth finally came to light, when the general publicly recognized me as colonel, when my father's jaw hit the floor in surprise, I didn't feel triumph, but relief. The silence I had maintained out of duty was no longer necessary. The lies that had defined our family relationship had been exposed. And in that newly cleared space, we were building something new. A family based not on illusions, but on truths, however uncomfortable or imperfect they might be. It wasn't the happy ending of a fairy tale. It was something better. A new beginning, earned through pain, forged in sacrifice, sustained by the hope that sometimes, even the deepest wounds can heal. There are stories that are not just stories. They are mirrors of life. If this one moved you, help us continue telling others that also deserve to be heard. Thank you very much, and have an excellent day.